I'd like to welcome you all to the 70th year anniversary of the Nakba. This event is co-hosted by the Coalition for Justice and Peace in Palestine and the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends in Palestine. Distinguished guests, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge some particular people in the audience. Ms. Julia Finn, MLA, and Mr. David Shoebridge, MLC, are the co-conveners of the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Palestine. The Honourable Professor Bob Carr. Mr. Jihad Dib. Shoket Musselman. Father Claude Mostovic. Associate Professor Peter Slezak from APAN. Mr. Hilmi Dabar from APA. Ms. Vivian Portsolt from Jews Against the Occupation. Mr. Ken Davis, the International Programs Manager from Union Aid Abroad. John Pilcher, an internationally renowned filmmaker. We also have apologies from some people who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. Jenny Leong, MLA for Newtown. Marine Faruqi, MLC. David Meehan, MLA, and Steph Cook, MLA. Before we go any further, I'd like to call on Dr. Nahed Odeh, who's going to do the acknowledgement of country. She's a legal researcher and a Palestinian originally from Jerusalem.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to acknowledge that we meet tonight on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We note that their land was never ceded in the same way that Palestinian land was never ceded. On this occasion of the 70th year of Palestinian dispossession from their country, we acknowledge the shared and ongoing Nakba of the Aboriginal people. Thank you.
The next thing I'd like to do is to ask that we have 1 minute's silence to reflect on those who have lost their lives in the 1948 Nakba and for those who are still living in the continuing Nakba. Just to set not so much set the tone for tonight, but to raise some of the themes that are going to come through in other speakers tonight, I'd like to not so much make any remarks myself, but to read something that's written by a Palestinian. We hear so few Palestinian voices in public. I think any opportunity to hear Palestinian voices, and particularly speaking about the Nakba, is quite appropriate for tonight. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a poem by Rafiq Ziada. The poem's called We Teach Life, Sir, and a lot of you might have actually been at her performance of it a couple of years ago in Sydney when she did a tour of Australia. So with apologies to Rafiq Ziada. Today, my body was a TV massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits and move those that are desensitized to terrorist blood. But they felt sorry. They felt sorry for the cattle over Gaza. So I gave them UN resolutions and statistics, and we condemn and we deplore and we reject. And these are not two equal sides, occupier and occupied. And 100 dead, 200 dead, and 1,000 dead. And between that, war, crime and massacre, I vent out words and smile, not exotic, not terrorist. And I recount 100 dead, 1,000 dead. Is anyone out there? Will anyone listen? I wish I could wail over their bodies. I wish I could just run barefoot in every refugee camp and hold every child, cover their ears, so they wouldn't have to hear the sound of bombing for the rest of their life the way I do. Today, my body was a TV massacre. And let me just tell you, there's nothing your UN resolutions have ever done about this. And no soundbite I come up with, no matter how good my English gets, no soundbite will ever bring them back to life. No soundbite will fix this. We teach life, sir. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir. I think some of the things that come out of that are how Palestinians are portrayed in the media, how seldom Palestinian voices are heard in mainstream media, the brutality of life under Israeli occupation and its lifelong consequences, and yet the resilience that Palestinians exhibit in moving under the continuing Nakba. So to outline the program for the rest of the night, we'll have firstly Mr. David Shoebridge from the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Palestine, and then our our special speaker for the evening, Dr. Ramzy Baroud, who will deliver the Nakba address. Following him, we have a guest speaker, Bob Carr, and then the final speaker will be Julia Finn from the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Palestine. And then we'll close the proceedings. Just a couple of things I'll mention to foreshadow in the closing. We're collecting money tonight for Gaza, but there'll be more of that. I'll give you more details at the end. So any money that we raise tonight will be given to a charity associated with one of our former Nakba speakers in Gaza. And Ramzy will also be signing books, which you can buy. He will have copies of his latest book available. So our first speaker now is Julia Finn, ALP member for Granville since 2015, and as already mentioned, she's a co-convener of the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Palestine, which is a very important organisation in the Parliament. It's a cross-parliamentary organisation, and she's well known as a strong public advocate for achieving peace in Palestine. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Julia.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people. It is very, very special that we've got so many people here today to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Nakba, but I suppose also to celebrate the fact that Palestinian people are still fighting and still articulating their love of their homeland, their rights to their homeland, and their right to return to their homeland. We've got some great speakers tonight, and I've been really looking forward to this event. But of course, it's very much touched with sadness at the hideous massacre over the last few days, and that coinciding with the establishment of the new US Embassy in Jerusalem. We've seen 60 people killed and thousands injured, who are overwhelmingly protesting absolutely peacefully. And those who aren't protesting peacefully are only throwing rocks, have been shot at, had tear gas thrown at them, and tear gas that's often been dropped by drones. And the brutality is just so disproportionate, and it is really quite shocking. And it's very unfortunate also that not only has the US established their embassy in Jerusalem this week, but they're also trying to block at the UN any criticism of the actions of the Israeli government. So what we've seen is a real escalation in tensions and a rapid moving away from the peace process. So I think it makes that all the more important to highlight the Nakba, highlight the ongoing fight of Palestinians, but also highlight the fact that so many have survived and are still claiming that right of return. And without further ado, I think we're going to have some really very special speakers here tonight, and I certainly thank you all for coming. And I think this is a very, very important and a huge reflection. The number of people here tonight is a huge reflection of the level of support that the Palestinian people have here in Sydney, as is the huge protests last night. So thank you all for coming, and I think it's really wonderful to have so many of you here this evening.
Thanks very much, Julia. Our next speaker is Dr. Ramzy Baroud, who we've invited to give the address of Issues Nakba Commemoration. Ramzy is a US Arab journalist, a media consultant, and author. He's published in hundreds of English and non-English language media outlets worldwide. He's also been a guest speaker at many well-known universities and is the author of 4 books. And as I've mentioned before, we have his most recent book, The Last Earth, A Palestinian Story, available for sale tonight. It's a book that's basically taken stories from ordinary Palestinians, and it gives their voices their own history to give a vivid picture of life in Palestine and in the exile that people undergo now. It's been described as in the finest tradition of people's history, and also a powerful tool to revive and record the human history of the Nakba, which is a very important thing to do. Ramzy's at the end of the Australian part of an Australian-New Zealand tour. He's done Adelaide, Melbourne, Perth, and now a 3rd talk in Sydney in a week. So I think it says a lot for his stamina. We're honoured to have him here for this year's Nakba address, and I'd like to call him to give his address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That comment about the stamina, I was planning to start by complaining how tired I am, but now I'm so embarrassed to do so. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank Mr. David Showbridge and Ms. Julia Fenn for sponsoring this event and for the amazing work that you do. We need more people of conscience like you to speak out and speak truth to power. The Coalition for Justice and Peace in Palestine, Kathy Peters, thank you so much for all that you do and for inviting me to speak to you, and Mr. Bakar for a legacy of activism for Palestine in every platform you've had, so we appreciate that, and to all of you for being here. I am an Arab American journalist, but I'm also Palestinian. I'm also from Gaza. My family are refugees from a village called Beit Daras. Beit Daras is one of the 600 villages, localities and towns that were destroyed in 1947-48. The people of my village are known as the Badrasawis. Badrasawis are the people of Beit Daras. We are extremely stubborn people. We have this reputation that I think is unfounded, that claims that we have large heads, physically large heads. And I think it's not true at all. I think it has something to do with the fact that we have resisted British colonialism, Zionism, and Israel for so many years. My last name is Baroud, gunpowder. And the reason we are called the Baroud family is because we used to smuggle rifles and gunpowder while fighting the British colonialists in Palestine. We are also known for couscous. We are the best couscous makers anywhere. In fact, I mean, you travel and people say, you know, I was told in Melbourne, for example, that we have the best coffee in the world. I have no idea where that comes from. I asked Kathy yesterday, she said, it's not true. Maybe, you know, but we are really known for our couscous. In fact, in the history of Palestine, by a Palestinian historian, Nakba, he speaks about Beit Daras, the resistance of Beit Daras, the 3 battles fought by Badrasawis, by peasants, with 7 rifles, fought 3 battles against the Haganah. They won the first 2 battles, and they lost because of the help of the British in the 3rd one. And yet, at the end, he mentions, and they are also known for their couscous. I am very proud of the Badrasawis. Now, I just learned that there is a tent in Gaza, at the Gaza border right now, where the old women of Beit Daras, some of them are Nakba survivors themselves, cooking couscous for all the protesters. So here you have it. A few weeks ago, there was this controversy that started when Virginia Atlantic decided to remove an item from the menu. Their menu, and the item is Palestinian-inspired couscous salad. Why? Because the Israelis complained. Some of them went as far as claiming that using the word Palestinian on the menu, even though it's not Palestinian couscous, it's Palestinian-inspired, mind you, is an act of anti-Semitism. That is the margins of the debate, right? So here we have it. We are still cooking couscous. It's Palestinian couscous and will always be Palestinian couscous. I wrote a book. It's the 4th of my books. And the book was inspired by my PhD research with Professor Ilan Pape at the University of Exeter. It's kind of an attempt at a people's history of Palestine. And the premise of the book was, or the main question was, what if ordinary Palestinians tell their own stories? And you would think, what a ridiculous question. Why wouldn't they be able to tell their stories? I mean, 70 years of Nakba, wars, sieges, occupation, apartheid, racism. You would think by this time Palestinians are telling their own story, and their story is the center of the narrative. But they haven't. And the reason that they haven't is that because the Palestinian has been reduced to imagery that may or may not be related to reality. One of these imageries is that the Palestinian is inherently and essentially a terrorist or violent, lacks human agency. The fact that Nikki Haley, that's the best response I've got to mentioning the word Nikki Haley anywhere. The fact that she blames Hamas for mind-controlling tens of thousands of Palestinians into walking to the borders to be killed is just indicative of the great deal of racism that are inherent in this discourse. Our people lack human agency. They are incapable of thinking for themselves. They are incapable of taking action. They are victims. So, it's either we are terrorists or we are victims. We are numbers, we're statistics. Our country is not a homeland, but it's a map that keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. In the end of the day, or at the end of the day, we have been dehumanized, reduced to either people who are incapable of making a difference in their own lives, or people who are inherently violent. And in reality, we are neither. We are neither terrorists nor victims. We are a people that have existed not just for 70 years, mind you. The Zionist movement did not create the Palestinian people. You might be surprised to hear that. We actually existed before 1948. The city of Jericho has been around for 10, 11, some people even say 15,000. But you know what? This just make the cutoff at 10,000 years. Palestinian city, perpetually inhabited by people who claim their rights to that land, and they continue to live there. My village of Beit Daras has evidence of Roman occupation, Mamluk occupation, Ottoman occupation. It wasn't until the Zionists came in 1948 and eradicated off the map. But we are still here. At the time we were 33,000, we are now 30,000. And when you ask us, where are you from? If you ask me in Gaza, where are you from? I'm not going to tell you I am from the Nusayrat refugee camp. That wouldn't make any sense. I'd say I am from Beit Daras. When members of my village and all the other villages die, on our graves, we don't have reference to the places in which we live, but references to the place, to the villages which we come from. So my grandfather, at his tombstone, Muhammad Mahmoud Baroud of Beit Daras, even though he is buried in a refugee camp. That's the kind of relationship we have to Palestine. It is not an issue of political or legal rights to be wrangled with, or to be overpowered and dominated by a status quo that is ever unfair. It is an entirely different type of relationship. It's a fight for justice. We take it with us wherever we go. So I wanted to raise that question. What if Palestinians tell their own stories? What would these stories look like? And is there a relationship between the Palestinian narrative of Palestinians in Yarmouk and in Gaza and in Ain al-Hilwa in Lebanon and in Palestinian Australians? How about the Palestinians in Chile who don't even speak Arabic, most of them? How Palestinian are we? Can we claim that sense of nationhood despite of exile, despite of the Nakba, despite of the fragmentation, political, ideological, factional, but also geographic fragmentation? The West Bank used to be a West Bank, which was part of Palestine, but now it's area A and B and C. And each area is controlled by a whole different mechanisms. And they are all divided between numerous checkpoints. The Gazans cannot get to the West Bank. They cannot go anywhere for that matter. West Bankers are trapped behind apartheid walls. Jerusalem is completely annexed illegally, of course, and now, thanks to Ivanka and Jared and Trump, it's now part of Israel. Well, it's not. It will never be, no matter what we say. So how Palestinian are we, despite all of these divisions? And it turned out that we are still even more Palestinians than we were. In some strange way, our suffering, our hardship, the Israeli occupation, the Nakba, had in fact accentuated our identity as opposed to broke it down. And I think this is why Israel is so terrified by the Palestinian couscous. The same way they are terrified by streets that carry the names of Palestine in Arabic. They are terrified of our memory is our greatest weapon, because they thought that perhaps at one point Palestinians will melt and disappear into the masses, the poor masses of the Middle East. This is the slogan that the Zionists used at the time. We are Arabs, and therefore we will somehow merge into a greater body of Arabs, and we will disappear. And this is why they are so frustrated. This is why they are killing all of these kids at the border, because 4, 5 generations later, if you count the Balfour Declaration, then 6, 7 generations later, you still have children standing there at the border, relating to villages that they have never seen, to places that Israel wished them not to be there and not to belong there, and walking there with the same determination of their ancestors. Now, you may have all the weapons and all the nuclear weapons, all the destructive capabilities, that you can't just kill 7,000 Gazans that they have, as they have done in the last 10 years, but kill them all if you want to. But if you can't control people's memories, people's determination, because you see, defeat is a state of mind. Defeat is not something that you can dictate with weapons. You see, if victory and defeat is something that is essentially material, Vietnam would have never been liberated. Algeria would have never been liberated. South Africa would never ended apartheid. But they have, despite of the disproportionate power, because of the determination of the people. And Palestinians are the most determined of all people. So I wanted to tell the stories of those Palestinians. And I wanted to convey their message. And I want to do even more important than that, I wanted to reclaim the Palestinian narrative. Sometimes I feel that we have been marginalized in our own discourse, as if we are a danger to ourselves, liability to ourselves. The Palestinian, you sit over there, someone else more capable, more articulate, smarter than you are, can convey your story to the world. I don't like that. And I think real solidarity starts when you start recognizing me, recognizing Palestinians, from our greatest intellectuals to ordinary people at the Gaza border, to be the center of the story and the storytellers and the narrators of their own suffering and struggle, but also the narrators of their own aspirations and their own humanity.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to tell these stories, and I'm hoping that it could contribute to a movement among other Palestinian writers and historians, that we don't shy away from taking the center stage as long as we are speaking on behalf of those people. Because you see, those 60 people who were killed in Gaza yesterday, Layla al-Ghandour, the 8-month-old baby, who was the 60th of all these victims yesterday, the 7,000 who were killed in Gaza in the last 10 years, the hundreds of people who were killed in the West Bank in the last year alone, these people have names. And they have the right to narrate. And their stories have to be the essential discourse on Palestine, because they are not just numbers. 60, now the number is 65. No, it's 90, it's 100. We are more than that. Each one of us is a story, is a village, is a struggle. And here's the thing. We are also not victims. Because you see, wherever there is a story that starts with the Nakba, somehow there is a story of empowerment that comes with it. Yes, my father was a refugee, and I was a refugee, and his father was a refugee, but my father raised 5, and my mother raised 5 boys and 1 girl. Somehow all of them are doctors. I can't explain why. I am the only one. In fact, my father said, "What do you want to study, son?" I said, "Political science." He said, "Your children are going to starve to death." Luckily, they haven't. But he managed to do that with poor refugee schools and poor existence, and lining up at feeding centers every day. And if you are late, you don't eat for that day. And donated used blankets from UNRWA and so forth. And somehow they had enough courage, enough strength, enough resilience, that they still create an educated generation. That is part of the resistance of the Palestinian people. It is so important that we don't reduce Palestinians to kids throwing rocks. That's a symbolic act of resistance. The real resistance is what's happening everywhere around you. 30,000, 40, 50,000 were at the border yesterday. And yes, there were kids throwing rocks, and kids just simply walked across the border in this symbolic act of defiance. But you also have tens of thousands of people who are trying to create political space for their own society. They're talking, they're dancing. You know how many weddings were actually held at the border? The circus clowns that were entertaining kids at the border. And of course, the Badrasawis making couscous. That was also happening at the border. Beyond Hamas and beyond Fatah, beyond factions, beyond slogans and cliches, there were reading circles, children sitting and reading. They are aware that their real weapon is their strength as a society when they come together beyond all of these things. That's an act of resistance. And I assure you that they will continue to resist. And with every story in that book, and in every story of every Palestinian book, there is suffering and hardship, but there's also empowerment, and there is resistance, and there is a triumph. And one day, that triumph will translate to a collective triumph of the Palestinian people, and we will free our land. Because you see, maybe we could have lost a long time ago. If indeed we were meant to lose, if we indeed were meant to be defeated, this would have happened a long time ago. 70 years later, every kind of weapons has been tested on our people. Every inhumane collective experiment has been carried out against our people, and you still have 10-year-old kids standing at the border, waving their paper flags in the face of Israeli snipers. A nation that does this, a nation that stands with this much determination and strength after 70 years, is a nation that cannot possibly be defeated. Peter, how much time do I have?
2 hours.
Because I would like to read a few excerpts.
Yes.
From the book, if you don't mind. I actually tried to challenge the formulation of Palestinian history, because, as I said, our existence as a people did not start with the Nakba. We existed way before, and we will exist long after. So I didn't want to divide Palestinian history into pre-Nakba, Nakba, post-Nakba, but I wanted to talk to people and allow the flow of the story to determine our history. So the story actually starts at the Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria, in present time, and which is also indicative of the fact that the Nakba began but hasn't truly finished. Just before he died, Muhammad Abdul Ghani al-Lubani had transferred the deed of his Yarmouk home to his son's name, and also left him with another small plot of land in Al-Mjabal, the original village in Palestine from which he was expelled before walking to Jober. The old man, a proud man, who paved roads in Nazareth and scooped cow dung in Syria, also left his family with his most prized possession, a large, old, rusting key that had opened the door to his cherished Palestinian home. The house no longer exists, but the key was kept in the family home in Yarmouk as a testament to their right of return. And now, the Yarmouk home no longer exists either. The legacy of that original refugee who once walked to Jober with his whole family in one straight line is still fully observed by his grandchildren, all of them. And Khalid Jamal Abdul Ghani al-Lubani, also known as Marco, is still walking to his next resting place in one straight line. This is an excerpt from a chapter called Abu Sandal. In Arabic means the one with the slippers. And the one with the slippers is an aging communist in Gaza. His name is Ahmed Al-Haj, one of the most fascinating and articulate people I've ever met. And Ahmed refuses to use terms like the Nakba. He uses the word crime. Yeah? He says the Nakba is an emasculating term. It means a catastrophe. How did this catastrophe happen? Who carried out this catastrophe? But a crime recognizes that there's a criminal. So I said, okay, in his chapter, I refer to the Nakba as the crime. He believes that he is the last true communist in Palestine. Everyone else is a pseudo-communist, he said. He was called Abu Sandal, the one with the slippers, because back in Palestine, back in his village called Sawafir, he wore shoes, and everyone else was barefoot. Therefore, he was labeled, singled out and labeled the one with the shoes, Abu Sandal, and that remains his nickname until today. Ahmed and thousands more stared at each tired soul as they walked past, looking for familiar faces or recognizable gestures as they stood near the border to ascertain who remained alive of his family, friends, and acquaintances. When he was finally able to wrap his arms around his mother and all of his siblings, gratitude rushed through him, especially on learning that his sister Maliha, who was almost killed trying to save the gluttonous cow, was alive and well. Not everyone was that lucky, of course. So many familiar faces were assigned a place in memory, as their journey in this life would end in Al-Fallujah and not in Gaza's refugee camps. Ahmed lost many people dear to him, including his uncle and his family from his mother's side, and a teenage Egyptian soldier he had befriended in the early days of the siege. The two friends would talk every night into the early hours of the morning about poetry and an ideal world where all the fallahin of the world were united against imperialism, Zionism, and the feudalistic families that spoke of revolutions but chose to escape before the battles even commenced. These missing faces would haunt Ahmed in the back of his mind. Yet many fallahin, peasants, thought that perhaps there was some mercy in not coming back at all. This excerpt is from the chapter Letters to Hiba. And Letters to Hiba wasn't really even supposed to be in the book in the first place. A gentleman in Gaza called me and he said that there is this man who basically resurfaced in Gaza. He comes from Syria, he was in jail, and he is separated from his family. Could you write his story or write a letter to the Red Cross? Maybe we can locate his family. So I spoke to him, and at the end, it turned into a chapter in the book, of course with his permission. It's called Letters to Hiba. Hiba is his eldest daughter. Hiba, I tried my hardest to shield you from all harm. You saw me in my heyday as a fighter in my military fatigue, but also as a broken man who worked under the burning sun as a manual laborer. My pocket hid the secret of a fake name on a forced identity card. All the while, I was fighting for you. And I really thought we could win. This is Ali al-Masih. I long fantasized about our final trip to Palestine once it would be liberated. I imagined you wearing the thobe I bought you from Burj al-Barajne, embroidered with the colors of the flag. I imagined Ahmed as a fighter too, wearing a khaki outfit adorned with a black and white kufiya. In that fantasy, I was always old, but strong enough to remember everything clearly. I would guide you through our village in Wadi Shalalha in Bir al-Saba. This is where your grandfather Aish fell in love with your grandmother Hamda, I would say, and you would smile and insist I tell you the story all over again. And you needed to know every detail, from the color of the sky to the flowers that bloomed. He was a poor man too, a Bedouin, like me. And unlike me, he was short, dark, and wrinkled. But unlike me, he had little patience. His life was always hard. And when he was forced out of his village, that small piece of land we called At-Tur al-Abyad, he lost his mind. He lost everything. And one final, very short excerpt, and you are free after that. A long time ago, Layla's grandparents had built a house in Syria. It resembled their earlier home as closely as possible. Perhaps this replica of their place in Palestine was meant to heal old hidden wounds. Their little haven, sprinkled with happy memories under the orange trees, and a fountain of stone and marble in the center of their small orchard, allowed them to travel in dreams to the home they longed for. During the war, they had to abandon this new house too and escape to Jordan, where they became refugees once more. Where will they return when the war is over? To Syria? To Lebanon? Or will they stay in Jordan? But why not to Palestine? Why never Palestine? Though Layla had never been there, the rusty key in their family home was clearly marked, the key to our home in Palestine. We will die here in the last passage, here and here, our blood will plant its olive tree.
Thanks very much, Ramzy. That was a fantastic talk, and I think everyone will certainly be interested in reading this book. I doubt we have enough copies to get some more. I'd like now to introduce our guest speaker, Bob Carr. He's familiar, I'm sure, to everyone in the room. He began life as his career anyway, as an NSW journalist. Then, after towards the end of his long parliamentary career, he became a foreign minister in the Australian Labor government led by Julia Gillard. He was instrumental in changing the voting pattern in the UN to a more sympathetic aspect towards Palestine. More recently, he played a large part in the ALP passing a motion urging the next federal Labor government to unilaterally recognise the state of Palestine. So I'd like to
ladies and gentlemen, I know I speak for everyone here tonight in expressing our admiration, our unstinted admiration for our special guest, Dr. Ramzy Baroud. He's seen things that would shake us to the core, and he's managed to capture stories, including his own, for us, that make us feel almost helpless in our capacity to do anything in view of this humanitarian catastrophe. But let me say, in response to the events that we've all witnessed out of Gaza, we may not be lawyers, and we might not know intimately the statute on war crimes, but to us, what happened at Gaza at that fence looks a war crime. There's been some practice at this, because I have etched in my memory, I'm sure you have in yours, what happened in 2014 on a beach in Gaza on July 9, in fact, when 9 youths were watching the World Cup and were taken out by Israeli fire. They had futures and they had hopes. Who can imagine, who can guess it? Maybe hopes of participating in international football themselves. But they'll never realise those. And their mums and dads, if they survive, won't see their son's potential. And then 4 days later, 4 boys were taken out by Israeli Navy fire on a beach in Gaza. And we listened to the lamentations of their families, and to me, they were war crimes too.
Yeah.
And it encourages me to reject as ludicrous the argument from Dr. Colin Rubenstein, speaking for the Israel lobby in Australia, that the IDF is the most compassionate, the most humanitarian military force in the world. The first question I want to ask is why you rate them above the Australian Army. I'm just curious. I'm just curious. But that argument cannot stand in view of what happened on those beaches in Gaza and what happened this week. But of course, it's a reminder to all of us that Israel began with massacres like this, and don't tell us they didn't occur, they've been detailed by Israeli historians from the Israeli archives. The Israeli archives yielded up damning evidence of what Jewish militias did, 3 Jewish militias did, to establish the state of Israel. And those historians are alive today, they stand by their evidence. They say in one case that they wished Ben-Gurion had gone further and driven all the Arabs out. But it's Israeli historians and Israeli documents that make the case. The Nakba involved massacres to drive Arab inhabitants out of towns, as you say, Ramzy, that had been Palestinian for countless years. Now, I'm here today with a message of hope, and that is that the Australian people are not fools, and they are watching on their TV screens these stories play out. And speaking for my colleagues in the Labor Party here, I acknowledge David Shoebridge and his strong advocacy from the Green Party. Speaking for my colleagues in the Labor Party here, you couldn't go into a Labor Party branch, I don't think, anywhere in New South Wales and get a pro-Israel motion carried today. When I stood up with a in the room, I said the ordinary kinds of folk, I'm here to do the nation. The next Labor government recognised Palestine. I wanted to go to the state ALP conference. I hope beyond that to the national conference. It got carried unanimously by a group of people, representative of the working class community. There's a woman there who's a delegate from the nurses union. There were people proud of their Cypriot backgrounds. They were typical of the people you find in the suburban Labor Party branch. And they just said, we're behind you, Bob. It got carried unanimously. And I'm proud to say I had the honour of moving a motion on the floor of the last state ALP conference that got through unanimously. They know the mistreatment of Palestinian youths on the West Bank. They know the harshness of Israeli occupation. They know it's an occupation. They know this is not a story about whether you're fond of Israel or the achievements of the Jewish people or not. They know it's a story about an occupation that's gone on for all these years, 50 years, a very harsh occupation, and injustices that have accumulated, and the spread of settlements. They understand all of that. And so I'm proud to say that now every state ALP branch except Victoria has carried a motion favouring recognition, and in Tasmania and Queensland it was immediate recognition by the next Labor government of the state of Palestine. And I just say, what is the alternative in view of what Trump has done and in view of the spread of settlements? What is the alternative but for the world, the non-American world, to say, look, we're recognising Palestinian sovereignty. We're going to recognise this Palestinian state. We're going to deal with it as a state. We're going to admit it to the United Nations as a full member. We're going to recognise that the Palestinian people have their state and deal with it as a state. and nurture that state and support it until Israel comes to its senses and recognises that only at the cost of sacrificing its own democracy and implementing apartheid laws will it rule a majority Arab people. And that's the position I want my party to take at its national conference, and a lot of us acting in the Labor Party are encouraged that Labor will be taking that position. Anthony Albanese addressed the lunch of the Jewish Board of Deputies only a month or so ago, and he said, listen, honest talk, it's getting through, it's getting carried. So you should deal with this as a reality. This is a reflection on what Netanyahu and the settlers have done. It's the Australian Labor Party reacting to it. Why do I dwell on this? Because to give you all a message of hope. The Australian people are following these things and they're absorbing it. They know what settlements are. We found that in our debate in the Labor Party. You don't have to spell out what it is. They know that Netanyahu now is linked with Trump. They've got that. They understand that. And I think you would find an honest opinion poll pointing to the fact that over 70%, getting on to 80% of Australians think it's time for a Palestinian state. And as hard as you think it is, Ramzy, you and your colleagues, give messages of solidarity from us to the leaders of the Palestinian movement. Anna Nashrari is thought of very fondly here when I was Premier in this building over 10 years ago and agreed to present her a Peace Prize awarded by Sydney University. The Israel lobby organised to pressure me out of doing it. And all they did was to mobilise people in New South Wales sending a message. They wanted the Premier to keep his word and give the Peace Prize to that brave Palestinian woman. And they regretted the intimidation and the bullying they attempted on that occasion. So to her, but to all the other leaders, and to the rank and file, the brave people you described with their individual stories, hundreds of thousands who fled massacres to cross into Gaza. As I've said to colleagues, there wasn't a Palestinian population in Gaza. These are people who hold keys to their old homes from which they were driven. And they seem to be resolved that their story is not going to be wiped out. It's not going to be overridden. And what we can do from here in Australia, so far away, is send them a message that we support them. You've captured so many stories. I'm going to be first in line to buy your book. You've captured so many stories. But I say to my friends, especially the young people of the Palestinian movement, go in and see members of parliament. Lobby members of parliament on a rolling basis and share your stories. Because the strongest argument for Australian support for Palestine is the stories of your families. Tell the stories. And it would be a hard-hearted member of parliament indeed who would choose not to respond to the stories of your dispossession and the associated cruelties. And I think my call for action out of this meeting, you've heard Ramzy's account, his eloquent account of the Palestinian experience. Your obligation, in my view, the practicing politician for so many years, is to make an appointment with a big group of Arab background supporters and others, 25, seeing a local member of parliament in his or her electoral office to say, where do you stand on settlements? Where do you stand on the mistreatment of Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza? And will you support recognition of Palestine as a message to Trump and a message to Netanyahu? That's what I urge you to do. That's my strong recommendation. That's my call for action out of this meeting. And don't be intimidated by the Israel lobby. They tried to intimidate Julia, and I gave her a call, attacking her in the Jewish meeting. I said there's only one thing to do in these circumstances, and that is stand up to them and say, I am proud to be a supporter of the Palestinians.
Yeah!
She did for another day's speech supporting Palestine. It was attacked in, surprise, surprise, the Australian newspaper. And I let him know that you get nothing by apologising or backing down. Sally, the president of the ACTU, got treatment too, and I gave her a call. I said, let me share some experience with you. It goes back to the Hanan Ashrari affair. You just stand firm. Everyone knows what you're saying. There should be a boycott of settlement products. That was your proposition. Everyone understands that. Don't let it be twisted, and don't be intimidated. You stand firm, and the Australian people have a great sense of fairness and social justice, and they see what's being done to the Palestinians. Thank you for bringing these brave stories here, Ramzy. Please extend our solidarity to your friends in Palestine. There are people in Australia who give this a very high priority. Indeed, we get goaded from time to time by the media for giving it too high a priority. These are problems far away. It's not social justice. Social justice is a concern of all of us, and you have our solidarity and our support.
Thanks very much, Bob. I think the two messages of practical politics and insight and inspiration from Ramzy are great things to take out of this meeting tonight. I'd now like to call on David Shoebridge, MLC. He's been a Greens MLC since 2010 and is co-convener of the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Palestine, and is a well-known, strong public advocate for social justice and the rights of Palestinian people.
Thanks for that introduction, Peter, and thank you all for coming out tonight to commemorate the Nakba, or the appalling multitude of crimes that constitutes the Nakba, which is in many ways, take that observation, Ramzy, about acknowledging the multitude of crimes that together makes the Nakba. And crimes have victims and crimes have perpetrators, and it's time we acknowledge that. That's the nature of the Nakba. I'd like to acknowledge as well this is Gadigal land, and thank you for the acknowledgement earlier. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And when we're talking about the struggles of First Nations peoples, I think from a position of a sort of privileged white Australian, to see the generosity of our First Nations peoples when they stand in solidarity with Palestinians and other refugees that have come to our shores, and they do it with such generosity and depth of spirit. And I think about how small our politics is in return. It's a good measure, isn't it? It's a good measure. But I'd also like to acknowledge the work of Julia. It's a pleasure to be a co-convener of Parliamentary Friends with Julia, because we don't have little partisan battles. I think Julia gets the struggle for Palestine. She does it with honesty and integrity, and I acknowledge her work as a fellow co-convener. Thank you, Julia. But also Bob and the former Premier coming back. I always think it must be, there must be a lot of barriers to coming back to this place, given its toxic nature. And I admire you coming back, and I admire the work you do on Palestine, and I give it credit. But I'd also like to pass on the apologies of Senator Lee Rhiannon, my federal colleague, and a great voice and a great supporter for Palestine. And she gives this promise to you through me. No matter where she is, she will always be a voice for Palestine and the rights of Palestinians. So I give her your very much. This place rarely hears the voices of Palestinians. Often we hear from particularly politicians from the coalition, but other politicians as well, a mediated view about Palestine. The inevitable cue of politicians to cheer Israel and cheer the Israeli venture and to ignore the crimes of the Israeli state. And we see it not just in this parliament, but we see it even more so in the federal parliament. And the toxic nature of Australia's politics, federally in particular, and the way our Prime Minister, in response to those images of violence, war crime, that we've seen on our phones and our computer screens and our TVs, we've seen them in just the last 48 hours. And the response of our Prime Minister was to say Israel has a right to defend itself.
Shame on him.
Shame. Well, shame on him.
Yeah.
And I said last night, and I'll say it again today, No nation has a right to defend itself with lethal force against unarmed children. No right has no nation has a right to defend itself with lethal force against unarmed protesters. And no nation has a right to so-called defend itself against children throwing rocks. This is not an act of self-defence. It was an act of unmitigated aggression against an occupied people, and let's name it for what it is and what it was. So today, we commemorate the Nakba. And 70 years is an extraordinary period of time for people to be occupied and divided and separated and dispersed in part throughout the Middle East and the rest of the world. But the hope that I took from Ramzy's speech and the thought of his book was, in fact, the act of occupation and oppression is an act that can also build solidarity and build identity and build strength. And there's that sense that we get from Ramzy that that's happening in Palestine. But when I saw those hundreds and hundreds of people coming together last night in the centre of Sydney, and I see the numbers we have here tonight, that building resilience and strength and demand for Palestinian freedom and justice is growing not just in Palestine and building Palestine. I hope it's also growing in Australia. And we, if we want to pretend to be a friend of Israel, no Australian government should allow the crimes that we've seen to go not called out. No Australian government should not stand up and condemn any government, whether it's the United States or Israel, for that obscene ceremony we saw in Jerusalem for the opening of the so-called embassy. That was an obscene ceremony. Yeah. An obscene ceremony. And to juxtapose it at the same time with the massacres that were happening in Gaza was an act of utter political bastardry. And how could our democratically elected government not call it out and name it for what it was? We have a government that isn't a friend of Israel if it says it's doing that. We have a government that is betraying the liberal democratic traditions of this nation when we ignore that suffering and that appalling crime against the Palestinian people. We should be looking for so much better than that from our state and our federal governments. I give you my commitment as a Greens MP to do all I can to maintain our party's stance in support of the Palestinian people, to demand an end for any engagement between Australia and Israel on things such as military exports and military cooperation with Israel. There should be none of that, because the IDF is not a force for peace and human rights. The IDF is a force for brutal occupation of the Palestinian people, and we should have nothing to do with it. So thank you for coming tonight. There should be more of this in this Parliament. There should be more of this in the federal Parliament, but we are living in struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that clear insight into the reality of Israeli oppression and the note of optimism that we might be able to look forward to. In closing, I'd like to thank all the speakers we've had tonight, and also again acknowledge the support for this event by the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Palestine. And also to thank everyone here for coming and participating in the event as well. As I mentioned before, we have some copies of Ramzy's book for sale, and he'll be signing them. There's also an event that I'd like to mention that is organised by Union Native Broader Feeder. It's an event where Dr. Olfat Mahmoud will speak about her experiences of decades of war and conflict in the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, and also speak about the Palestinian right of return. It's a speech around her new book, Tears of Tashiha, which has recently been published. And it'll be launched by Bob Carr. And it's on the 14th of August in this house at the New South Wales Parliament. If you want more information, then you can contact the feeder. Just one more note. I mentioned earlier that we're collecting donations tonight for Gaza. The donations will be sent to or via the Middle East Children's Alliance, which is a charity that Dr. Mona El Farah, who was one of our previous Nakba speakers, is associated with. The Coalition for Justice and Peace in Palestine is donating $500 to this appeal that we're starting. That was raised recently at a film screening where the film was a documentary about Ed Tamimi, who was the teenager recently jailed for slapping an Israeli soldier. So on that note, I'll hand the rest of the night over to Ramzy and his book. Thank you very much.